in?
Let's jump in.
We got a lot to get through, so we are going to jump in as people join here.
Awesome. So we're going to start with a quick little Fohr intro for anyone who's not familiar with us. We're then going to dive into some insights that James and I are going to lead, and then we're going to get into discussion with some incredible panelists who are joining us. So hi to all of our clients who have joined. You're all familiar with us, obviously. But for those who aren't as familiar with us, a little bit about us to kick us off. So at Fohr, we have incredible, delightful, magical technology to really help us create best industry-leading work in the influencer space. That's not possible without an incredible, delightful, and insightful team, which we have. They're incredibly tapped in. They're incredibly smart. They are wonderful experts who help our clients move through what is ultimately a very fast-moving and wild space. And we've been here for a while. We began back in 2013 when we were ultimately only creating influencer content for influencer audiences. That has changed as time has gone on. We're now creating influencer and creator content that is feeding brand social. Fast forward a little further, it's also in paid ads. And now we're in this landscape where influencer and creator content is actually feeding nearly every channel of the marketing mix. And at the same time, we have leadership and bosses basically saying, do all of this and make the content go viral. And we're seeing from a lot of our clients, a lot of people in the space, that it's overwhelming. There's so many stakeholders to manage, so many KPIs to meet, a lot of internal education, and increasingly our role with our clients is becoming helping them navigate that shift of influencer and creator marketing moving to the center of the marketing mix and not being an amplification channel. And at Fohr, we see ourselves as both teachers and students of influence. So what we mean by that is, we're not just in the social or influencer marketing space. We believe that influencer marketing is at the center of the marketing mix. And that means that we need to deeply understand influence and all of its components. So at any given time, we're diving into data, we're diving into landscape conversations, we're diving into surveys, and we have been studying for this webinar today. So we did a whole study on virality. It's a thing that's coming up more and more and more. So the study involved nearly 30,000 influencers with a minimum following of 10,000. Their collective following of those that were in this study was nearly 50 million. And we have looked at just the last 3 months of data to make sure that our insights and results are as relevant as they can be. Because again, the space is moving very quickly. And here's a little bit about us, or who we've got on today. So I'll hand the mic over to you, Noah.
Yeah. So we've got Nathan and Nikki who are going to be joining us for a discussion all about virality here in the last half of this. I am James. I started the company about 12 years ago. Grace has been with us for now 10 years. So almost for the full ride as well. And Grace heads up the strategy team here at Fohr. So let's dive into it. That is enough about us. We are here to talk about virality. In some ways, most interesting and most annoying part of social media. Part of the issue is even just like the word, it's vague. What is virality? Nobody can actually totally define it. The definitions are very different. I think as we think about today, there is no formula for virality. Anyone selling you that, is James off camera? Oh, I shouldn't be. Speaker, maybe. I don't know. Oh, it's because it's using Grace's mic, but that's fine. Sorry about that. Yeah. There's no formula for virality. For us today, it is about giving you a framework to help increase the probability of this happening, increase your chances of having your posts overperform, be it on your own channel or with influencers. So let's first talk a little bit about how we think about and define virality. There's a few main buckets here. There's mainstream virality. I think that is often what we associate with something going viral. It is something that you can talk about at the proverbial water cooler. Everybody has seen it. It's everywhere. You can't get away from it. That is incredibly rare, difficult to predict. We've just been through a few kind of very fast cycles of this. Brat, Demure, you all know, you kind of know that when you see it. Then there's product virality, and that is for us when there is a huge amount of influencers and just regular people talking about a specific product. So generally it's not a single post that is driving product level virality, but it is a mix of it, and you feel like this product is everywhere. And then there's a creator level virality, right? So for an individual creator, they have achieved some kind of level of virality for them. The post is doing really well. Again, we use virality almost interchangeably with the idea of overperformance. I think that, again, often as we look at these three buckets, there's too much focus on the mainstream and product. I don't think it's realistic that any brand can influence mainstream platform-wide virality or make a product go viral. I think like Kim here is a great example. Skims obviously does very well. It does really well on social. A lot of the products that she put out have not done that well. Skincare line did not do well. You can use the same exact kind of formulas and a product is not going to connect. Mainstream virality, again, I think something that people forget if you think about Brat is that Brat was a great album. Brat went viral largely because the album was really, really good and people wanted to listen to the music. It helped then that it had a very recognizable cover. It helped that they did a great job kind of fleshing that story out. But if the music sucked, nobody would have cared about a Brat summer, right? And so this stuff can't really be manufactured. And I think too many people spend their time thinking about and focusing on these first two buckets and not enough time focusing on the creator one. And that is largely where we are going to focus. Part of this has revealed a truth in influencer marketing that we think the era of authenticity and the reign of authenticity has ended. And that's not to say that authenticity is no longer important. It's just that the way these platforms work, increasingly we're seeing content from creators we don't know. Increasingly, brands need to work with influencers to get to tap into the algorithms. And that means that we're not carrying the relationship that the influencer has with their audience across the content as much. And so authenticity is just no longer the thing that we feel like is the kind of North Star of what everybody is looking for. And increasingly, we hear people talking about unexpected. They want something unexpected. They want to do the unexpected. They want to work with unexpected influencers. And again, just feeling this kind of sea change into a new era of social and influencer marketing. And a lot of that has to do with the pursuit of attention. Again, attention used to be connected to a creator's audience. They got a certain percentage of viewership on most of their posts. There wasn't a lot of variability now. There is now a huge amount of variability. And the difference between a poorly performing post and a highly performing post are really different. And so it makes sense for you as a brand, for us as an agency helping those brands, the products that we build, it makes sense that they are pointed at trying to increase the odds that something is going to do well, because there is so much value in figuring out how to make content do better. And we are getting asked all the time, do the unexpected, jump on trends, move faster. All of that is great, but there are things that we lose in that. And part of it is the basics of marketing, which are still very true, right? We we don't need to just get attention and have something go viral. We need it to resonate. We need it to be persuasive. And we don't want to get into a rat race of everybody chasing the same trends, and this kind of, it takes something that should be fun and unexpected and makes it monotonous when everybody is trying to do the same exact thing. And it's why we feel like there's this important moment right now to step back, understand what is driving behaviors on these platforms, and think about, as a brand, what is my strategy going to be to get and capture not just attention, but the kind of attention that can turn into real results for the brand at the bottom of the funnel, which is obviously, in the end of the day, so important. We also acknowledge it's like really hard out there, you know. I feel a lot of our clients are feeling the pressure as their C-suite and senior leadership finally wake up to the fact that influencer is important, as marketing teams reconstitute themselves around influencer, and influencer moves to the center of the marketing mix. It makes it difficult, right? Skims, who again has been so good over the last couple of years of releasing shoots with the kind of the moment star. They just came out with their shoot with Charlie. And our team was commenting on like the fact that it was 73 days after Brat was released and Skims came out with a Charlie campaign, and that felt too long. It felt like they missed the mark, which again is setting the bar really high of how quickly we have to work. And then Brat, kind of took a back seat. We had last week was all about Demure. I'm sure it was in your inbox. And there's just a feeling of fatigue of having to move this quickly and jump onto all of these trends. And is it being done in an intentional way that customers are getting joy and having fun with, or are we just kind of like dialing this in? And there is also, I think, a lot of pressure because brands that are doing this well or have found success in kind of centering their strategies around social and influencer and what is happening on these platforms. Again, our clients are feeling that pressure and saying, well, can you do what Abercrombie did? And can you do that next week? And it's why, even when we are presenting a proposal, we really try and step back and say, what's the 5-year plan, right? Because as our focus starts to narrow around these short-term trends, and we're thinking in days or weeks, it still is important to zoom out and understand where you're trying to go over the next couple of years. And often success on the social platforms has not as much to do with the content and so much to do with great products. And this has been true for the last 70 years. Good marketing cannot fix a bad product, and great products are almost always at the center of great marketing, and building a great company and being resonant on these channels ultimately is going to come down to having a product that people really love. And the creators are struggling too. We hear this a lot from them. There's a lot of burnout, and in some ways, again, there's so much excitement for working with creators. There's so much excitement for jumping on these trends. But often you have a creator who's resonating with an audience, is starting trends, is performing really well, and the brand reaches out and they either brief them much too tightly and they don't give enough creative control, and the content tanks, and the creator feels bad and the brand feels bad and everybody feels bad. Or there's a trend that was started by a creator, brands start participating in that trend without maybe working with the creator, and we often lose the individual creative mind behind some of these things as it gets taken over in the platform. But we're feeling not only burnout from the brand side, but also the creator side. And so we're going to talk through what is a better way to do this, and how can we do this in a more kind of sustainable and effective way. So I'll pass to Grace.
Beautiful. Okay, so the first opportunity we have here is to really lift and separate from attention-led tactics and move into culture-led strategy. So what do we mean by that? Where we need to be is at the center of this Venn diagram, where we have in the yellow, what are our audience's values and beliefs? What do they care about? What are they thinking about? What guides their behavior? Over on the right, we have what material or aesthetic trends are happening right now. What are they seeing? What cultural signals are happening that could make sense for our audience? And ultimately, what is our brand delivering on? What can we offer people? What are we going to add to their lives? And so as we think about our strategies, we need to really be centering all of our work in the middle of all of this. So to have a little look at what that looks like for a brand, we've got an example here for Aritzia. So if we think about what that audience values and believes in, a couple of things: value, accessibility, personal style, they want to feel effortless or look effortless, trends that they're seeing or kind of social cues or signals that they're seeing right now. A lot of talk about capsule closets. There's a clean girl aesthetic, trad wife core, and then brand promise. What is Aritzia offering customers? They've got an excellent experience, essential styles, and everyday luxury. So how do we have something in the middle that kind of hits all of these circles? Enter Nara Smith. And so I'm sure a lot of you have seen this partnership. It's one that really, really, really resonated because Nara Smith, if you're not familiar, is a creator who has been massive. She is really known for her making things from scratch videos. She's a big part of the trad wife conversation. But ultimately, Aritzia came out with this Institute for Soft Science where they named Nara as the head scientist of the one making the softest fleece from scratch. And Aritzia's audience and potentially new customers just loved it. You can see some snapshot sentiment in the bottom of how much it resonates, you know, how great the products are, how much they love Nara, how great of a fit this is, how the marketing team should get a raise. And it's a really great example of finding a creator partnership that can get some virality, that is at the center of all of those things and isn't just a tactic. So culture-led strategy really allows us to root our work in who our audience is, what they care about, how they're feeling, which creators are resonating with them, and which conversations brands can participate in authentically, either directly or through creators. And so this is just a little snapshot framework that could work for your brand, that every brand really needs to develop for them, of like how to decide which trends to participate in and which not to. And there's some trends that are mainstream that are for everyone, and it doesn't necessarily make sense for every brand to jump on. But if you are, you have to be moving at the absolute speed of light, or you're doing more harm than good. The next is, you know, if it's a trend for your category, maybe again, do it fast. But if it hits all of those things, it's absolutely something that you can participate in and should. And our team is amazing at helping brands figure out how to do this effectively. So we'd love to hear from you if this is something you want to learn more about. Importantly as well, it's really integral when working with creators and trying to jump onto trends and trying to use trends to boost performance and overperformance, that we as brand marketers remember that our job is not to script the hook or script the post. We have someone here who is incredibly capable at hooking and holding audience attention. We should absolutely leverage that and use that, and remember that our role is not to try to be the one to do that. So instead, we need to create the conditions for that high performance content, and we need to create the conditions for resonant campaigns. And that involves great briefing, great casting, and again, a culture-led strategy. The second opportunity we have here is to be early on creators and not just trends. So what do we mean by this? Well, first of all, at Fohr, we have access to over 250,000 creators. We can really dig into data and insights about whether they're performing or not, what they're talking about, who their audience is, what they care about, the type of relationship they have with their audience. And we have this new really cool feature that is all about virality, where we can track and see, you know, if someone's reaching an overperformance level. I will say the definition, because this is such a complex thing, is something that we're still finessing and experimenting with. But we'd love to be able to show you more about this. It's been really cool. And this study was really informed by this new piece of tech. So it's really exciting. But one thing that we do want to talk about is that in this study, again, pulling an incredible amount of data, individual virality is rare. It's not the everyday meal, it's the champagne toast. It's happening less than 2% of the time for professional creators. And you can see that this doesn't really change depending on the tier. It's a really rare thing. And, you know, it's something that should be celebrated and not expected. But another thing that I think is important to remember here is that, again, we talked about that mainstream level of virality. Before Jules was mainstream viral and everyone was like, wow, what is this? This is so funny. What is demure? She was highly, highly resonant and just not on your radar. This is a chart from her Fohr profile where it looks as though she's flatlining throughout the year, but she had 940,000 followers until recently, and now she has 1.3 million. Incredible. But incredible before every single brand in the space was trying to jump on this. So again, another little look here at another way to think about this of how big these numbers are and how big the opportunity is to work with incredible creators, and there are so many. On the left, we have this is all before mainstream virality for Jules. And to contextualize it, because sometimes the numbers are so big that it's hard to wrap our heads around, there's a post here that is 15 times the capacity of Madison Square Garden of people liking it. That's not the people who saw it, that's the people who like it. That is nuts. And brands are not paying enough attention, or probably everyone on this call is, but there's still a little bit of a knowledge gap of how big the opportunity is. 18,000 people liking one comment. This is again before mainstream virality. Nearly enough people to fill Madison Square Garden liking one comment on one post. It's nuts. The opportunity is huge, and insane opportunity to be able to work with people who are overperforming, resonating, who aren't yet the one person that everyone's like, okay, 200 brands who are in Jules's comments on that post, all clamoring for the attention. There's so many incredible creators, and it's important to get to invest in and pay attention to creators early and not just trends.
We are going to talk with the panelists about more tips and tricks. What can you do this week, you know, next month in your strategy to increase the chances of either your content going viral or the content you work with a creator? But I do think it is important to follow up with Grace just said, just how rare it is. You know, 2% of the time it is happening for creators. We also recently just did a little analysis of brands. It's even more rare for brands. And I know a lot of people here probably do influencer and they're doing social strategy. Again, Skims is an enviable brand in so many ways. And I think, you know, most brands would be happy to have their social presence and resonance. We went through the last 80 reels that they have done. They don't have a single one that's gotten 100% of their audience in viewership. Not a single one. And that's Skims. They have Kim Kardashian, you know, as their founder. So like, you know, they're getting 6% viewership on reels. Nike is getting 3% viewership on reels. Like, for brands, this virality is just like not happening very often. And so leadership is, I think, as they are understanding the importance of influencer more, there is, you know, a lot more scrutiny, and there are a lot more questions of why isn't this going viral? Why isn't this working? We need this to happen more quickly. And I think it's important to try and reframe it from, you know, them having scrutiny to the bigger opportunity to getting this right. And again, you know, there's so much data, like there's so much dependence on data, and that is, you know, increased, I think, in the last decade. But again, it lacks context. It doesn't, you know, capture the kind of full picture that we are trying to show. And it's, you know, with influencers especially, we're in a difficult place. A lot of times I'll say that, like, the whole industry, and I think the people that work in it, it's like, I know this works, and I can't totally prove the extent to which it works, right? Because often it is, you know, kind of first click, not last click. And again, we know how powerful the platforms are in guiding customers' decision making, but there is often not a direct link to that, and but they do want the proof. So, you know, there is a little bit of a vibe shift happening. There was the, you know, viral LinkedIn post recently from an ex-Nike marketing exec, and you know, outside of the entire post, for me, I really thought this one sentence that, you know, they were spending money on stuff that was less effective but easier to be measured versus spending money on something that was more effective but less easy to be measured. For me, that is influencer. That is like, you know, social. Is that like, I know this works. I know this is the most powerful way to communicate with your audience. It is often hard to measure it exactly. You do have to have a sense of belief. The brands that are really winning, I don't think they spend their time in conference rooms asking themselves if this stuff works. They just do it because they know it works. They don't need the proof necessarily, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply analytical rigor to what you're doing. And again, I think what we're talking about here is, how do you increase your odds that this is going to happen? And if overperformance is an increasingly important part of making social content work, then the most important thing is building a framework to increase the probability that a post can do well. As Grace said, you're creating a situation where something can do well, which again, it's not much different than like leadership, right? They talk about like, you want to create an environment where people can be successful. That is what you're doing. You are creating an environment where influencers can shine and do what they need to do. And the other part of that is increase your shots on goal. You can go to Keats, you know, that like ultimately the percentages of when things are going to go viral are difficult to change. You see from 5,000 followers to above 500,000, the percentage doesn't really change of how often something goes viral. And so you have to increase your shots on goal. You know, you have to understand that jumping on trends is not a strategy. It is not a stand-in for a strategy. It cannot be what you are doing solely. Trends are amazing. They are a cheat code into placing your brand into a culturally relevant thing that is happening, connecting with customers. But you need to have intentionality. You need to think about a culture-led strategy. The absolute easiest, best, what is the key kind of takeaway? The thing that you can do to best increase your chances of content doing well with influencers is pick influencers who content does really well. Like, it sounds silly because it is so simple, but that is why it is so powerful. If, you know, there's an influencer who on average is reaching 80% of their audience and one who's reaching 20%, and they cost the same, that means you're getting 4 times the amount of eyeballs for the same money. And there is a much better chance the content you do with them is going to perform. So with that, we are going to have our wonderful panelists come off camera here. Okay, and we got everyone? Okay, great, fantastic. So welcome everyone. We have with us today Nicky Reardon. So Nicky's started his career, I don't know if started, but I feel like the moment when you really kind of came into your own was building out the social and especially the video strategy at BuzzFeed, and absolutely knocking that out of the park. He has since gone out of the zone and is consulting with a lot of brands that you know and love. And we are so happy to have him. He actually just had him on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we had such an amazing conversation. Nathan has been in the game for a long time. I think we knew each other from the Tumblr days. I'm not going to say how old we are, but that does give us a little bit of a sense of how long we have been doing this. Ran social over at American Eagle, and also is on his own. He is now a CMO whisperer, basically. And many of the brands that you love probably have Nathan in the CMO's ear helping guide what they're doing. Thank you all so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with a simple one. I said we were going to kind of talk through actionable advice. What do you, how do you advise brands, and how should brands approach understanding what trends they should jump on and what they shouldn't? Because it's overwhelming, and it feels increasingly like they're expected to jump on all of these trends. How do you advise brands in how they should approach this and how they should pick a trend? Nicky, we can start with you.
Sure. I have kind of a controversial opinion on this, so we'll start with the banger. I guess one, I think with trends is like, if you're doing it for a brand, like I feel like it should feel natural. You know what I mean? Like if you have to plan an hour-long meeting to discuss like how to do the Apple dance, it's probably not for you. You know what I mean? Like and that's okay. Like you don't need to like feel that pressure to do that. You know what I mean? Like I think a lot of time with trends, like or brands, like you know what I mean? Like if demure and demure fall is like if you sell sweaters, it makes sense. You know what I mean? But like not every brand needs to be demure, and that's okay. But also, again, my controversial opinion on this is like, I always preach to everybody and do this in myself is like formats over trends. Like, I think building IP as a creator or a brand is invaluable in a way that like words cannot even describe, because even if your demure video does so well and gets 500,000 views, what are you going to do next month? What are you going to do tomorrow? Like, also, I don't know if anybody is like going to shop your product because you said it was demure, you know what I mean? But IP is like, if you have a format, it runs forever. You know what I mean? Think of like Hot Ones or something like that, you know, like using a complex example for what in my past work, like that was a format, and once it landed, it's been running for like 4 years. And that is the difference between a trend and IP. And I always try and teach to everybody, like thinking about IP, but also trends are super valuable, you know, like if, especially like you're saying, like to tap into culture and be a part of a conversation that's happening. But you should feel like you have something to say. And if you don't have something to say, you don't need to be a part of the conversation, and that's okay.
Yeah. Nathan, what about you? How should brands think about integrating trends into what they are doing and how they're communicating?
Yeah, I have a much more what I call like truth bomb situation, which is I always start in a really boring way, but it's a really important way if you're trying to speak to senior level executives or to board of directors, which is evaluating where your social media practice, and that includes organic, influencer, even sometimes paid, where does it currently sit in your funnel? Because for a majority of brands, they're more in the middle to end. And the idea of saying like, we need to hop on trends, that is a really slow process. And you can't, a lot of kind of people will say like, we should just rip the Band-Aid off and suddenly be brat or suddenly be demure. And the thing is that your audience is not catered to this yet. And the process of deciding that we are going to be a culturally mindful brand takes a little bit of a process to get you there. You can come out the gate and do kind of unhinged things. I think one of the most fascinating things I saw was like, and I have a lot of opinions about how I feel about the IRS and the United States Postal Service, like starting to just go wild to the point where I just thought somebody had hacked their account. But you know, for a lot of brands, you know, every brand, in my opinion, needs to be what I call culturally conscious. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be hopping on every trend. It doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be doing everything and that trends are the kind of pinnacle of their strategic approach. It does mean that you need to basically look into ways where you can start to explore this. One of the easiest ways, as we've seen in a lot of the forward slides, is like to be in the comment sections and to start to change your voice and to change the tone of how you approach it, to actually be culturally engaging in the comment sections. I have seen a lot of brands get the entry point to being able to hop on trends or to be able to be trending themselves simply because they started off by starting in the TikTok comment sections, showing to executive leaders, hey, this comment we had actually had a higher engagement and reach rate than any of our content that we posted in the last 2 months. I think that this is kind of something that we need to be paying attention to. And I think our audience is actually very open to this process. I don't believe every brand should be hopping on trends. I just believe that every brand needs to be culturally conscious.
And what about, and Nathan, we'll start with you on this one. I wonder, basically the same question, but now thinking about it through influencers. A lot of the ways that we help brands jump on trends is using influencers and saying, okay, this, they may not put this on their feed because it may not make sense. Their audience may not be ready for it, whatever it might be, right? But we, but we're going to use an influencer to jump onto this trend. Does your advice change? How do you think about using creators to start to shift the tone of the way your brand communicates?
Yeah, and I mean, the last part of what you said there is exactly what it is, which is influencer, in my professional opinion, and in the way that I consult and advise, if you are a brand that is considering a new target demographic with who to reach, using influencers and creators is actually the most effective way to do that. Because as much as we all love management consulting firms and the giant decks that they send us, it's like they don't really have any sort of usable content in there. We just get this deck that says you have an opportunity to actually reach millennial women between the ages of like 29 and 38. And your CMO and creative teams will usually be like, yeah, but our targeting and all of our paid media is targeted towards like 22 to 29. Influencer is the absolute best way to be able to reach target demographics and target customers outside of what your atypical marketing is. So I absolutely always encourage, if you're looking to test men's, if you're looking to test a new product, if you're looking to test a new target, using creators and seeing how their audience, which typically falls in the same demographic profile as the creator themselves, is actually the best way to do that.
I love that. Nicky, what about you? What are your thoughts on how it's the same or different when brands are doing this with influencers? So I love the point of like, hey, if you have to have an hour-long meeting about this, maybe not for you. And again, I think brands that feel that are saying, maybe we should just let influencers do the trend stuff for us, and we'll like kind of let that be the like scouts that we send out into the field almost to see if we can resonate in this way. What are your thoughts there?
I think, yeah, I mean, also again, too, I don't know, like doing a trend with an influencer campaign also is just in general seems difficult to me because there's now this like timeline involved. So like, you know, like if you reach out to me about Demure today, in 2 weeks, we don't know if it's culturally relevant anymore. But I do really agree with the sentiment that Nathan said about like using creators to test things or like reach audiences that you can't reach, especially if it's things that they already post about. Like, again, going back to this formats thing, or like I'll use myself as an example. Like I have most of the videos I make are about like music, movies, and marketing, or like really just talking about like internet culture and things like that. But I have done campaigns with brands where they want me to do a marketing review of this campaign they did. Like I did a campaign with Gap recently where they worked with Tyla, where I did another Gap just did a campaign with Troye Sivan, and I did that. And I am a great creator for that campaign because I have a format that has consistently gotten hundreds of thousands to millions of views for 2 years, where I review these campaigns and analyze the marketing behind it. So like I am a great creator for that campaign, but I might not necessarily be a great creator for Gap next month when they're advertising Gap Kids or whatever. You know what I mean? And that is like a really interesting thing to understand too. Again, I think it's like, look at what they already make. And if they can already make a video about this doing well, your goal is like, how do I slot myself in there? And I don't think you should be going to somebody trying to be like, we want you to make this new thing. Because you don't know if it's going to work and they don't know if it's going to work. And also, like, I really think too, it's just like making content, like it really feels like a muscle to me, you know, like the brands that I have had the highest performance with are brands that I've worked with like 5 times now. And it's because I really learned how to like advertise their product, you know what I mean? Like, and I really learned like what type of language they like to use, how they like to integrate their call to actions. Like that is an important thing for me to be able to understand. And once I do, it makes constructing the entire rest of the video so much easier. So like that's another thing I think is really important too. You know, like look at what they already make. How do you slot yourself into what they already make? Or like there's this quote I saw on LinkedIn. It was so good. I wish it was mine. And it was like the goal with your organic content should be to stand out, but the goal with your branded content should be to blend in. And I thought that was like such a good way to think about it, of like when you're working with you know, your organic content should be something new and exciting. And like, again, like talking about these formats, like what is going to make people interested in you. But when you're working with a creator, it needs to blend into them, right? Like nobody loves to be advertised to. Like if they did, none of us would have jobs, right? So like we have to find a way to like make this message digestible and consumable and also give value to the audience. And I think a big way you do that is just to like do something and integrate your self into something they already do.
Yeah, we talk about it as like window or mirror content, and that, you know, when you're working with a highly resonant influencer that like, especially on TikTok, that is doing their own thing, that you're not trying to get them to reflect your brand, you know, onto their audience. You are like using them as a window. You want to see into their world and understand when you're like letting someone bring you into your world, into their world, versus like when you as a brand are trying to tell your story. And Nathan, I think that segues nicely into, I think, a big pain point that a lot of people on this call right now are probably feeling, which is how do we, you know, how do we tell these stories internally to more senior leaders who aren't living in these platforms all of the time? And you know, how can we you know, how can we kind of share that success? And you mentioned like your truth bomb being like that this is going to take a while. And again, as you think about a multi-year path to a brand changing the way consumers see them, we know that senior leadership is going to want results in a month. How are you advising and helping these companies like tell the stories of why social and influence are important?
Yeah, so I did an interview with Rachel Carton a couple weeks ago, who, if you don't know, is like one of the biggest you know, social media personalities and experts in this space. And one of the things I said was, she was like, something that you wish social media managers knew. And I had said, your board of directors and your C-levels care way more about your reporting than you actually realize. But sometimes if the reporting is not in the format that they kind of, you know, can understand, they will glaze past it. But the reason why in my previous role, we had probably one of the largest organic content and influencer budgets was simply because we knew how to show performance in a way that a performance marketing leader would understand, which was like focused on reach, focused on engagement. We would equate a lot of our engagement in comparison to engagement rates on paid media. We would use a lot of terminology like CPMs and like return on ad spends so that they could understand it. Because if you just say, oh, this partnership with Jules generated 1.8 million views, they're not going to understand that. But if you say, we drove this much reach based off of this much spend, it generated this much spike, which we were able to analyze on our website or on our profile page. We also acquired this many followers as a result of it. This is all the positive sentiment in the comments that we got from it. Those are things that equip you to make the ask, to be able to get more budget, to be able to prove what you're doing is a success, and to be able to basically say, hey, yes, we are that weird team that does the weird stuff, you know what I mean, that gets all the glitter and that gets kind of the sparkle. It's like, but we are still very, very smart, capable, and knowledgeable marketers. And that is kind of the paradox, which is to really show the impact and effectiveness of influencer, organic, sponsored posts, whitelisting, all of the above. You have to be able to basically show that in a way that is able to convince marketing leadership that you are still marketers. And we talked at the top half of this about how attribution is still a mess. We all know that attribution is still a little bit of a mess because all of us are on here, you know, as upper funnel, top of funnel marketers in our space. So if you can pull as much bottom of funnel lingo, is what I'll call it, into your reporting, that is how you will actually get the attention of a lot of leadership, because most of the leaders only understand acquisition performance in paid media. If you look at most CMOs, that there is only a handful of CMOs right now that come from either a creative or a social background. The only CMO that I know in existence at a brand right now, I can't remember her last name, but it's Sarah at Caudalie. She was the social media director. That's the only one that I've known. So I'm not trying to say like this is a travesty. It's more so CMOs, senior vice presidents, are basically rooted in performance acquisition and being able to prove the money that they're spending is making sense. We have to collectively start to be able to generate reporting and to be able to generate proof that what we're doing is impactful and effective in the best way possible.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it that resonates with me. I mean, it's like part of the reason I started Fohr, was feeling like we needed to have influencer and like what my friends were doing on the internet look like other types of advertising. And I remember talking to this guy who was running media at NBC or something, media buying, and he was like, "My advice to you is make influencer boring. Once it's boring, it will be huge. Like it needs to just feel to like the people making these decisions of where to spend money, like a just thing everybody does. It's a column on the spreadsheet, and like you can have your fun inside of it, but like on the spreadsheet, it just needs to look like a lot of the other things. Because these organizations are used to spending money in that way. That's like that. I love that. That's so good. Nikki, what about you? Have you had to personally, maybe from your time working at a large corporation or in your role now as a consultant, help brands kind of pitch this internally of like, why should we be spending all this money on this, and why is it important to try and be making content that is going to tap into culture instead of just like, hey, these new shoes are on sale?
I mean, I think honestly, it is this like weird battle again. I always talked about this, that like data is this weird double-edged sword, you know, where data doesn't lie, but that doesn't mean you can't interpret the data incorrectly. And I think that is like a really big, you know, thing that you see in this influencer space or like any social media thing, or just even like the concept of like reach and impressions versus engagements, you know, like at the end of the day, it's nice if people know about something, but it's better if they convert. Like, it's like, who cares if they know about it? And there's 1,000 different ways we can all talk about awareness. You know what I mean? And I think oftentimes, you know, awareness can be this smoke and mirrors of the internet. So like that's always something I'm really trying to do. And then also I think too is like speak in receipts is like a really powerful thing or like an effective tool that I have found. You know, I don't say like, hey, I think it would be a good idea if we did this. I said, hey, we did something similar that generated this amount of views with this engagement rate and this impression. I think if we replicate a similar concept, we could see a similar level of engagement, or like things like that. You know what I mean? Like don't speak in future, speak in past, speak in receipts again. Like that has been like a really, really helpful thing, even when I'm talking to brands, you know, and they come to me like with whether that's like a consulting thing or you know, like creator deal. Like if they're trying to get me to do a concept, I'm like, I can do what you want, but here's something that I know will work, or here's something that has already worked. And if you haven't done it, use a competitor. That's like another great way, you know, if you're like, hey, I see that XYZ, you know, we're Abercrombie, and I see that American Eagle got XYZ views and impressions doing this. I think it's worth investing in. You know what I mean? Like, then you're not selling them on this idea of something that might work. You're selling them on this idea of, you know, like talking about something that has already happened. And I think people in general are a lot more receptive to that. I think humans are just like by nature very visual creatures. If you give them a video, if you give them a number, if you give them a synopsis, they're going to be a lot more willing to just like hear you out at the very least. So that's kind of what I always try and do, is just like, again, like speak in receipts.
What I want to ask both of you, you know, let's talk more about, you know, we're going to put virality in quotes, right? But virality, overperforming content, like, you know, again, we all know increasingly how important it is. And for brands, you know, having a post that goes super viral can have a real enormous commercial impact on the bottom line. We've heard that from large retailers of just like this one post went viral and we saw like, you know, the biggest lift in sales we've seen in years over a couple of weeks. So like we know this is important and it's worth talking about, even if it is hard to understand exactly how to do it. And it's not something you can just replicate. But maybe a good structure is to talk about just short, like what are the things that, you know, brands can implement like next week to increase the probability that the posts do well? And maybe what is something that you think they do that if they stopped doing, it would increase the probability of stuff doing well? I'm going to start with you, Nikki.
Yeah, I will tell you the same thing I tell every client I've ever worked with.
Oh, we're getting it for free.
Yeah, you're getting this one for free. I view social media like a 9th grade science class. You literally have to sit down and write a hypothesis, an independent variable, a dependent variable, and a conclusion. So like if you're looking at a video or a video that has performed well, you're like, okay, this video got 100,000 views. Why did it get 100,000 views? Maybe you can look at the comments. Maybe they'll say you something. Maybe it had a really compelling hook that did really well, right? So your independent variable is like, okay, how do we repeat this hook in a new piece of content? I think if I use this hook and this, literally 9th grade science class, like write your independent variable, dependent variable statement. I think if we reuse this hook for a different type of concept, a different video that has a different thesis to it, then we can get a similar level of engagement. If you get the same thing, great. You have now learned that that hook is valuable and it should become a format. If it doesn't, you realize the reason this video did well was not the hook. It's something we talked about later. So you go back to the video that performed well and you find a new independent variable and you test it again. And you keep rinse repeating this process. And like over time, you will, I always like think of it like a tool belt, you know, like, and I always view I don't know if you guys remember like Mad Libs. Does anybody remember that? Like that's how I call it, literally like Mad Libbing. Like I will sit down with a client and I will watch videos with them in the way that like sports do tape reviews of like where they watch their games. And I literally watch it and I'll be like, pause after 10 seconds. I'll be like, what was interesting here? Why did this hook the viewer? You know what I mean? We have 500,000 people that made it to 10 seconds in. We need to be talking about just these 10 seconds. And, you know, we talk about it. And then when I talk about Mad Libbing, I will literally script out the exact 10 seconds. And then I remove all the nouns and adjectives and, you know, it literally like a Mad Lib. And I'm like, let's try this exact 10 seconds again, where we replace it with all new information. So it's a different video, but like we are seeing if this independent variable is going to change our dependent variable. And that is literally just like what I do over and over again. And then I build this tool belt, right? Because once you've done that with 10 videos, now you have 10 different hooks, or maybe you have 10 different, it was not the hook, it was a specific subject. So now you've developed 3 new content buckets. And over time, it just becomes so much easier because then you don't have to wake up and be like, what do we post today? You're like, oh, wow, this really interesting cultural moment just happened. I know this hook will work well. I know this content bucket works well. Now let's add in our little Mad Libs of the nouns and adjectives, and that's your viral video. And that is honestly like a winning formula. I do it with every single one of my clients. It always works. I think clients get frustrated because it's not a quick process when you're talking about what can you do next week. But again, once you have these things, you develop a format and you can do it for the rest of the year. So thinking about ROI is like, you now didn't just get one video, you got a year's worth of videos. So that's kind of, I think, like what I would say, pro tip.
And I know you always are like, on the podcast, you're like, yeah, if you have a video that does well, like, why are you not doing it again? What's the next one in the series? As you said, like, double down on what is working. You don't have to reinvent it every single time. Nathan, what about you? How can we increase the probability that we're going to like resonate and this is going to work?
It's tough to follow up. If we look at what Nicky said as steps 1.2 through 10, I always say step 1.1 is to be able to, if you're saying we want to go viral next week, step 1.1 is, okay, we need to make content that our audience wants to see and not what marketing leadership wants to see. And you have to just get that initial buy-in. Then you can start basically tactically executing. Because the problem is that marketing leadership, the most social influencer people on here have probably pulled their hair out having to navigate the messaging component of what we do with trying to make it funny and memey and viral. And you have to just completely instill over and over again, we are producing impactful marketing strategies on social and influencer for our audience, not for leadership. And if you can get that buy-in, then you can basically, get more buy-in on the tactical aspects of it.
Yeah, that is so true. And like so much easier said than done, but it's so important. And I think that like a good reminder that while the formats have changed and the platforms have changed, like a lot of the basic stuff is still the same, right? Yeah, if we're putting something into the world, it has to help the audience in some way, right? It has to add to their lives. It can't just be noise.
And that's the fundamental challenge right now with being in this space is that the finish line, it's not even moving. It's like getting replaced. Like channels update what produces engagement and reach like every 2 or 3 months. And so you work all this time to sell through a concept or a content series. You get the sign off on it 2 months later. And you know what? Actually, like this entire like idea that was rooted in what we felt like would actually lift our overall reach and engagement, the channels are no longer prioritizing that because suddenly they're prioritizing shares to friends. Like we all apparently have to put music in our bios as of today, like on Instagram. So like you have all these new channel features that just happen at a drop of a hat with zero warning ever. It's like, and then we have to navigate this insufferable aspect of, we don't even know if TikTok is going to be here in like 6 months. So like all these things put us in this high pressure cooker situation where we're simultaneously viewed as like the ugly stepchild of the marketing department, but we're suddenly also urged to produce viral moments. And for us to be able to do that, again, we have to be able to communicate this understanding with senior leadership that what we are doing actually requires necessary resources, time, and we need the support of you to be able to move in a moment's notice. You cannot wait on a trend any longer. Like I have a lot of thoughts on everybody who has jumped on the Jules trend in the Demure and Mindful, but like you don't have 2 weeks to wait to be able to try and explain what it is and explain what you're doing. You just have to be able to trust your social and influencer teams that they're not going to get you canceled.
Yes. That is fantastic. And we could talk for another hour. Y'all are so great. We are going to share the recording around. We will also get from y'all the best way for people to reach out, to follow you. And look, everyone on this call you can hire, so brands out there, there's a whole menu in front of you. Any of us would be happy to help. Thank you all so much for lending your brains to us for 30 minutes here. And thank you everyone for joining and have a good rest of the day.